Hello, hello. Come in and sit down. Hello, good folks. I want to tell you, I advised Jolene, as is always the case. My students always sit in the back. Nobody sits in front. Here's one of my A-plus students. This fellow was in my class 43 years ago and he flunked. So he's trying to sit up front now. I want to tell you, I pulled a trick on people last fall. We had free tickets to a Dodger game taped to the bottom of the chairs here. So I encouraged the students to come forward and sit here, and a few did, and they got free tickets to the Dodger game. One doesn't know what's under these seats, does one? There's actually nothing under there this time. But learn a lesson for next time when you know, don't be afraid of her. She hasn't bitten anyone in at least 5 or 6 years. You have a treat tonight. Let me tell you, I'm excited to have Jolene here. About, I'd say, I don't know, 15 years ago, 12 years ago when we met, 10 years ago at least. I think it was in Cincinnati or someplace like that. I think at the time I was president of an organization, and one way or another I was on the podium when she spoke, gave a speech at this major conference. And I sat there saying, wow, I like what this lady is doing. Found out she lived not too far from here, over in Santa Barbara. Ojai she lives, her office is in Santa Barbara. So I wrote her a note. She didn't know who the hell I was from Adam. And I wrote her a note, and I said, Madam, you made me say, wow, we're going to work a lot together in the future. And we have. And I'm proud to tell you that for 2 years she was our entrepreneur in residence here at LMU. She's won about every award there is in the country to win. Some of you know what Beta Gamma Sigma is because some of you have been honored by receiving that this past weekend, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. Beta Gamma Sigma is the national business honorary society for the top business students in the country. She won their award as Entrepreneur of the Year in America. She's won the Levy Award, she's won everything. This lady has been on the Oprah show. Now that's a hell of an accomplishment. How many of you have ever been on the Oprah show? She has been every place. Most recent honor that I think is neat, I mean, she's got I could sit here and talk for the next 59 minutes and give her 1 minute to speak with the stuff she's accomplished. The most recent one is Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England, or of Great Britain, invited her over to participate in a thing to set up a program to train English women in business and entrepreneurship. That's kind of pretty darn neat. This lady has done everything. Let me give you a quick background. She started out in the corporate business world, had a good career going for Polaroid Corporation. She would have been a wonderful bean counter, but she couldn't be a bean counter. She came up with some ideas on businesses and that. She came up with a new idea for a business. She proposed it to the top management at Polaroid. And they said, no, it doesn't. She was proposing it as a business they ought to go into. And they said, no, this doesn't quite fit us. But they liked it so well and they liked her so well, they put her in business. They actually financed her, put her in business, had her set up the business, and they were partners in the business with her. So she became an entrepreneur out of a spin-off of Polaroid. She eventually sold that business. She made $1 or $2. I have no idea how much. And this is the point that I love the most, and this is what I want you to pay attention to. I try to tell my students, and I'm not afraid to tell entrepreneurs this, I hope you all become filthy, filthy, filthy rich. But that's unimportant in life. It's nice. You can buy a better car than that beat-up piece of garbage you got right now that you're driving. What counts when you become a successful entrepreneur is not how much money you make, but what you do with your success, what you do with your power that you gain from succeeding as an entrepreneur, which includes the wealth. Wealth does to some degree give you power, but the success you have gives you context, gives you confidence, gives you the ability to do some things. That's when this young lady absolutely started to shine. She ran into a situation. Inc. magazine did a story on the top 25 the top 25 entrepreneurs in America. There wasn't a woman in the damn place, which got her a little upset. To boot, if you want to get really angry, they gave the award to Debbie Fields' husband from Debbie Fields Cookies. How the hell could you give Debbie Fields' husband an award as the best entrepreneur in America? So she contacted them, raised all sorts of hell, and said, this is awful. There's wonderful women entrepreneurs out there. So they weren't too dumb. They said, okay, good. You go find out. You go research it. And if you come up with some good stuff, we'll publish it. And so she ended up doing major writing articles there. This ignited in her a passion for a need. And I hope you all find passions like this in your life. She found that women in America, and young women in particular, were not being encouraged to go into business for themselves. They were not being encouraged to find their dreams. Nobody was helping them. She got more and more involved. And here's the part I love. What I said to you, how I appreciate entrepreneurs is not by how much money they make, but by what they do with their power and success. She sold her business. She had some wealth. Might have been $20. I have no idea, and I don't care. She has now dedicated her entire wealth, her entire heart and soul, to creating an entrepreneurial venture to train and educate and help young women to learn how to go into business. That's a hell of a deal. She's been successful in the corporate world. She's been successful as an entrepreneur within the corporate frame. She's owned her own business. Now she's what we call a social entrepreneur, a person who uses their entrepreneurial talent to achieve good in society. And that's about as good as it gets. So with great pride, I give you what I could say is one of our colleagues here, because she was our visiting entrepreneur in residence for 2 years. I give you Joline Godfrey, one lady that I'm proud to know.
Well, that was a lot. Thank you, Fred. Before I get started, I'd like to hear a little bit from a few of you here. Why did you come tonight other than that Dr. Kiesner made you do it? Anybody? What brought you here tonight? Any entrepreneurs in the audience except one right here?
I've been to these before. There's always something to learn here that you'll never learn in any book or class.
Okay, cool. Somebody else?
I graduated from here about 5 years ago. A friend of mine from high school and I just are in the beginning stages of starting a small business.
How cool. What's the business?
It's called My Paper Wishes, and it's invitations, customized invitations.
Fantastic. All right, we'll talk more about that before the night's over. Somebody else, what brought you here? If you don't know, you maybe should leave now. Okay. Yes?
Kind of on the side, but also what resources are available out there to help women kind of connect, network?
If I don't cover that when I'm talking, come back and ask me, because I'm going to try to just talk for maybe, I don't know, 20 minutes, and then let us just do kind of a free-for-all. So make sure that I come back and answer that question. Somebody else? Why are you here tonight?
Yeah. Inspiration.
Inspiration, okay, cool. Well, I'm here just because I thought I'd have a great time, and so I'm hoping we'll have some good conversation. I will tell you I drove here for reasons of pure madness from San Francisco, so I have been whizzing since like 8:30 this morning. I'm not incoherent, but I'm definitely in stream of consciousness mode, so that may work for you in some way, actually. God knows what will come out. A little background on, Fred has certainly given extensive background, but I can tell you that I'm trained as a social worker. I didn't realize I had an entrepreneurial bone in my body, frankly, until I was in my mid-30s. I was a good corporate woman. I had sort of accidentally, I graduated from social work school in Boston and found this killer job at the Polaroid Corporation. And those were the days when Polaroid stock was very high. It was one of the first socially responsible companies in the country, really. And they actually had a full-fledged clinical therapy department, and I joined it. Got inside and sort of got hooked on this combination of social change in the private sector. I just thought this was the sexiest thing that I had ever encountered, and yeah, the widgets were interesting, and yes, I like those cameras, but gee, what was really cool was being able to have impact inside the confines of one of the country's, at that time, major corporations, because they had resources. And for me, probably the very first lesson was social workers never had any resources. You know, if you wanted to work with poor people, then you were up a creek because you just had no money. And so I got into Polaroid and thought, money lets you do things, very cool. So at that time I began to work my way around the company and was there for 10 years, having just this great time. And then, as is wont to do, as you've seen in so many internet companies the last couple of years, the stock began to slide because they had no clue what they were doing, and desperation set in this great company. Desperation is one of the most wonderful climates for an entrepreneur. And if any of you are hello, I know you. If any of you are working in companies where, stock is down, they're really scared, they don't know what they're going to do, you should start whistling because this is your lucky day. And I knew that I was onto something the day, truly, sales were dropping off. This was a company that was like golden child of America. Nobody knew what to do. And I realized one day everybody else was depressed and I was oh, that's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me.
Is that yours?
Yeah, well, we're just going to ignore it and pretend
You know my
this
rule?
didn't happen. It's my rule.
If the phones go off in my class, I own them.
In fact, you can take this. In any event, I realized I was whistling much like that phone is doing right now and will stop momentarily.
I love it.
But the point was, I knew I was needed now. So when you are faced with desperation, needs, trauma, panic, this is the time for an entrepreneur to really flourish. So I took this opportunity to go off to Mexico on vacation for a few days, and I had just finished a major project inside the company. I was no longer working as a straight social worker at this point. I was actually on a very elite product development team in the company, and the team effort had come to an end, and we were being disbanded because now it was going into production. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was kind of spoiled. I didn't really want to go back to clinical work, and yet, this is a company that, it was the early 80s. The glass ceiling for women at that time was definitely in place, and no, I was never going to be president of this corporation. So I really didn't know what to do next. Before I went on vacation, I sat down with the man I was working for, who was an amazing mentor of mine. And he said, well, Joline, you have 3 choices. We were sitting over a martini. I remember it well. He said, you can go back. We'll find a way for you to go back and work in the counseling department. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't do that again. Or we can find another job for you working for me. This guy was the head of worldwide manufacturing, so he had some opportunities. Or, he said, you can just hang out and see what happens. And I remember my anxiety level just went to the roof because I thought, hang out? The ambiguity of that when people are being laid off is just terrifying. And what did I know? Maybe nothing would come up, and I'd been here for 10 years, and now what? I literally left that meeting, afternoon, late afternoon, drinks at a bar, and went off on the airplane and went off to Zihuatanejo, Mexico. 2 days later, had this epiphany. I was actually shooting pictures with my camera and sort of had one of those insights of, oh, now I get it. I see. This is what it means to see. I, in that moment, developed the eye of the photographer. I just got it. And I won't even bother to go through the whole journey, but I went from there to, there's a business opportunity here. I went back to Polaroid 4 or 5 days later, and I said to the man who sent me off with the here are your 3 choices, listen, give me my salary, my office, and a secretary for 6 months, and I will come back to you. And I don't know what I'll have, but I think I'll have a proposal for a new project for the company. I was thinking in terms of a project, it would make money, and I was going to be one of the true saviors of this company whose stock was going into the toilet. And he said, okay. And off I went. I ended up coming up with an idea that I will tell you in a sentence. My elevator pitch for this was teaching people how to see in the great resorts of the world. It is a measure of how desperate this company was that they put $750,000 into this idea. And in fact, we set up shop in the Sonesta Hotel in Bermuda. That was my first place, and we were about to roll out. And finally, the CEO of the company was sort of getting his head screwed on straight, and he said, Jolene, this is a little far afield from the core business of the corporation. We think either you need to give up the project or we'll put some money in and you can spin it off and go run your own company. For the next week, I went home to my perfect little condominium in Harvard Square. I sat, you think I'm an alcoholic by the time I finish this story, but I sat in my backyard, drank scotch, and cried. Because here I had this perfect, secure job. I was being paid more than any social worker in America, believe me. And why would I give this up? So at the end of the week, I put away the scotch and I stopped crying and I decided nobody else was ever going to give me a shot like this, and I was completely stupid if I didn't run with it. And it was on that basis that I went from being a social worker through my life as a corporate woman into the true world of the entrepreneur, where everything is a crapshoot to some extent. I ran that company for 5 years. I was probably one of the first women to get venture capital in this country. The '87 crash came along, the venture capital firm was killed. That was the end of my relationship with the VC, and I ended up selling the company very shortly after that. That's kind of how I ended up moving to California, because you're a good Eastern girl and you think, oh my God, now what do? I burned my bridges as a social worker. I'm no longer a corporate woman. My business is gone. Now what? Well, I've never done the California trip. So I decided to move out here for 6 months and get sort of squared away and then move back was my plan once I figured out what my next business was. Once again, fate and desperation intervenes. I came out here, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I didn't know anybody, it was just cold, and I have to say that it was for the first time in my life I really felt as though I was falling out of a plane without a parachute. And that was the story of my life for 2 years. I lived in a steady state of terror. And you know, people will say, well, how do you get over it? And the real answer to the entrepreneurial terror is you don't. It just becomes a steady state and it's normal. And so you get used to it and it's kind of interesting and, oh, well, this is what it's like, fine. And you go on. But it's not as though you ever stop necessarily being fearful. In fact, if you aren't fearful, you're probably in total denial and not very smart. So better to be in touch and know that you should be scared silly. As Fred mentioned, I did get this great shot with Inc. magazine and ended up, as a result of all of that, writing a book on women entrepreneurs. And I spent 2 years on Inc.'s nickel, traveling around the country, having great dinner parties with women, interviewing them and getting great transcripts. And at the end of that time, wrote a book, and the very last chapter, I remember sitting literally over my Mac in my office, kind of tying up loose ends and thinking, oh, wow, you know, why would I work with, why would I even write about adult women any longer? If anybody had talked to women when they were 14 years old, I wouldn't even have needed to write this book. The action is with girls. I need to do something there. I had no clue what I was talking about. And that's another key. You don't necessarily need to know what you're talking about in order to go forward with an idea. And you really need to remember that. You need to do your homework once you have the idea. But you don't necessarily, the more you don't know, the greater the adventure is, because the more there is to learn. And if you are a learner, if you are just a true learning junkie, it's the ideas that really make you think, oh, I need to learn more about that, that will really get you jazzed. And that's what happened with me. It was like, well, why doesn't somebody talk to girls? So I couldn't see a business model, though. Remember, I have a background as a nonprofit person, as a social worker, but I had now gotten jazzed by the private sector, and I saw the impact that the private sector can make. And But for the life of me, as I was working in the early days of Girls and Money, being my central area of interest, I couldn't find a business model there. So for 4 years, I did run a nonprofit. It was called An Income of Her Own. I will tell you, I hated every bloody moment of it, because I don't enjoy running nonprofits, is what I have come to. And that may be a topic later, but in any event, ran it for 4 years, and everybody said to me, well, you know, girls aren't going to be interested in this. They want boys and makeup and music, and I kept thinking, well, yeah, they do, but I bet they want money, too. Seemed obvious to me. And so we started with one conference for girls, and all we did was bring them together in a group, and bring a bunch of women business owners also in the same room, and I had this sense that chemistry would happen and something cool would emerge. It did. We needed to get it a little more structured than just bringing them in the room, as it turns out. And that's what I spent the next few years figuring out. What is the mechanism? And over time, of course, the question became for a good entrepreneur is, how do you leverage? That's the next question. Okay, where's the scalability? Where do you make money? And how do you leverage this idea to really make impact? And finally, I realized, oh, this is content. Content can be repackaged as product. A business model begins to emerge. And so after running a nonprofit for 4 years, in 1996, we transformed the nonprofit into a for-profit company. And today, Independent Means is in fact the leading provider of financial education for the teenage financial novice. And our brand for girls is the Dollar Diva brand. And in about 1.5 years, when we finally get to the next portion of our business plan, we already own the Dollar Dude brand. So just so you guys know, I'm going in both directions. And so it's really turned out to be this very cool journey. And that, in a sort of Reader's Digest way, is something about my journey. But what I was thinking about, trust me, I've had 8 hours to think as I have been on my way here from San Francisco. And I thought one of the things that might be interesting to tell you just a little bit about has been my experience over the last few years during the internet boom. Because in some ways, the story of an entrepreneur is really encapsulated in my experience over these last few years. I have never done what everybody else has done. And for much of my life, that was very painful, you know, because I always felt weird and different, and why couldn't I fit in, and what was wrong with me? And it turns out that, of course, is a key trademark of an entrepreneur, and in fact, your greatest asset. It just takes a long time to figure that out. But as I was beginning this journey, nobody was looking at Girls and Money, and it was just by raising that question and being different that I sort of understood I was onto something. Now, I didn't have a market. It's important to know that, because you know, you're doing your business plan and people will say, so, what's your market? If you say I have no market, they say you have no business. I had no market. Girls hadn't thought this was important. Nobody thought this was important. And yet, when I tried the following experiment, and let me try it now, how many people in here had businesses when you were little kids? Okay. How many people babysat when they were, for money when they were kids? This happens every single time. Particularly if, and I'm delighted to see so many guys who did it for money, this is cool. But particularly for women who babysat when they were kids, people would say to them, aren't you great with kids? If your brother was out mowing the lawn, they generally didn't say, aren't you great with lawn? They said, aren't you resourceful? How much money are you making? From the very earliest moments, we get different messages. Now, obviously, things are a little different today because we have as many women as men in many MBA programs. I don't know what your numbers are here. It's pretty even. Yeah. But nonetheless, historically, women have played a kind of economic catch-up game. And Even when they go for their business plans today, they're in front of an investor, the scale, the vision is generally still not quite as large as, I mean, some of you guys, you get ridiculous. I mean, you really do think you're going to take over the world in 6 months, and that's very cool, and I'd like my sisters to sort of come along with that, but maybe we need to meet in the middle somewhere. But I mentioned this, I didn't have a market, because just as I didn't fit in, it's another piece of information about the entrepreneurial process. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It may mean you have just tagged something that nobody's identified yet. Edwin Land, who invented the instant camera, said, listen, people don't know that they need an instant camera. If you ask them, they've never even heard of such a thing. How do they know they need it? And so I really wasn't daunted by the notion that I didn't have a market, because the other thing Land had said that I was completely entranced by was the following. If you want an interesting life, do not bother dealing with ordinary problems. Only take on the impossible. And I really made that sort of a mantra of my life to the point of the extreme. And sometimes the impossible can get a little out of hand, and you need friends to rein you in a bit. But I have to say, you never have a boring moment if you have taken on an impossible mission. And again, one of the adventures of being an entrepreneur is identifying something nobody's ever seen and running with it. So a few years ago, as you all know, we had this phenomenon called the internet. And about the same time, I was out there with my business plan, and you know, I'll be damned, I did not call my company independentmeans.com. It's just independent means. And I had an interesting, what I thought was a very cool business model. It assumed a certain penetration of the market of teenage girls. It assumed a certain average sale of constellation of products and services to these girls. And you multiply the penetration times the average sale, and you got these great big numbers. And I thought this was really cool. I could guarantee you, so I said, a good $50 million business. And I thought that was pretty respectable. And more importantly, I actually had some money coming in to show this was a real business. I thought it was home free. But at the same time, of course, I had colleagues who were out promising billion-dollar businesses the more the money they lost. And that thing was flying then. It was all very interesting, and I was completely, once again, out of step. And I had friends who criticized me deeply. I wasn't in touch with the times, and my vision wasn't big enough, and maybe I should rethink this, and it was an ugly 2 years. You can imagine my joy over the last 6 months. This has been a gorgeous time for me. But I had to endure 2 years of ridicule and pain and self-doubt and all the other things that come about when you seem to be walking down your own path and the rest of the world is doing something entirely different. And one of the things I really thought about as I was driving down here today was, if you really want to ensure a completely boring life, A, you should always do what other people say you should do. And B, you should always try to please people, and then you can be really bored. I personally have a very low tolerance for boredom, so I never do what other people want me to do. But I say that, and I give you one sort of counterbalance, which is, while at Polaroid, I worked for a little while for this terrific guy who had not gone to college, did not have his MBA, but was sort of a townie from Somerville, Massachusetts, and he had worked his way up to kind of middle management, and I reported to him for a while, and I would always walk into almost any meeting or any issue sort of jazzed, a little wired, as you can see I am now, and if I felt something, boy, I must be right. And I will always remember this one time we were working on whatever the issue was, I have long since forgotten, and this guy looked at me and said, well, yeah, Jolene, you can be right. Do you want to be dead right? And I tell you that little tidbit because it goes with, if you're going to really walk to the beat of your own drum, literally, you have to find a way to survive. Because if you don't survive, your vision or your idea or your imagination is never going to come to fruition. So you're in this very strange land of being your own person, having your own voice, making your vision come alive, at the same time sort of finding a way to stay alive. And it's a very slippery thing. But back to the internet, because that's really where I want to close the story for a little bit and open to some questions. I leave next Monday morning for Cincinnati, where I'm off to meet with a new round of investors. And it's real interesting because I had given up on looking. Last November it was like, investors, forget it. The internet decline was just beginning to hit. And it seemed as though I had hit two impasses. One, I hadn't been an internet company. And then in that time when everybody was just panicked, nobody wanted to give out any money. This one company who had seen us and said no in the boom days has since come back to us and said, could you bring that business plan back to us now? And so Tuesday I'm going back and we'll give it another round. The really interesting thing though is I'm not sure I want their money anymore. You know, now I think, well, geez, they made a lot of really bad investments. Why do I think I want to do business with them? What makes me think I should trust them is one of my concerns. And my other concern is they're now looking for rescuers. Do I really want to be the company that's supposed to pull them out of their doldrums? I don't think so. So I'm in another whole entirely place now, and just in terms of my journey, you know, there's still lots of chapters to go. I have no idea what's coming next, but I do think it's been the most interesting journey I could possibly have imagined for myself, and certainly coming true to Lan's advice to take on impossible problems. Working with teenage girls and getting them jazzed about being tycoons and caring about community and social action all at one time is, without exception, the most extraordinary thing I have ever had the privilege to do. So, and I should also add that I get to work with the world's coolest people, because you can imagine the kinds of people who are attracted to this idea are themselves visionaries and activists and daring. And so I am all the time surrounded by just fantastic people. And I have been privileged to have mentors who have made a difference for me, and certainly Dr. Kiesner has been one of the most important. So, okay, so I've jabbered on quite long enough, and I wonder if I've said anything that's sparked your imagination or you'd like to argue about. I love a good argument. Yes?
Well, I think you really touched on the heart of what being an entrepreneur is, but I have a question for you. When you talk to people about succeeding financially, a lot of times they give this, like money's not everything. And you tell them, yes, money's not everything, but the journey makes you a better person. And you mentioned that you want to make these girls tycoons, but at the same time socially responsible. I think that's very important, not just for women, but for society as a whole. And for example, I don't like the word minority because of the way it sounds, but women were considered minorities, and right now African Americans, Mexicans, or Hispanics, and I think you could apply a lot of the things you've done for women with every
Absolutely.
society.
Oh, and when you see my business plan, you'll see I intend to. Absolutely, and it is very tricky. I mean, there is no question that a lot of people will not talk to me because a lot of them will contend, well, that's a nonprofit thing. You shouldn't even be talking to me about for-profit. You know, you're really talking nonprofit, and you don't care enough about making money. Now, I'll laugh all the way to the bank, and that's just fine, but I think one of the things that's finally come true to me is that I don't confuse success with making money. And this was brought home to me one day by a woman I was interviewing a long time ago, and she said, you know, for me, success doesn't come at the end of every quarter. It comes at the end of my life. And I have to be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, did I do what I needed to do? And I think that it means if to get funding for your business, you generally have to talk to, let's say, 100 potential investors to get 2. If you want to do something that's socially responsible as well, you probably have to talk to 200 to talk to 2, to get to 2. But for me, it's worth the extra effort. Yeah, you. It's okay.
From your experience, what type of ROI do you see these venture capitalists requiring these days, and if any, how much of the pie are they looking to get?
Well, it's a really, you know, obviously they were, I think, going for at least 40% ROI about a year ago. And depending on what phase you were in, they minimum 35% and then up from there. Howard Stevenson, who is I guess is still a professor at the Harvard Business School, once said to me, he looked over a business plan, an early business plan for another business I did years ago, and he said, you know, Joline, this is one of those businesses that could be a gem if you don't go to the VC. You know, you could build it, you could make a lot of money with it, control the whole thing, it would take a long time, but it would be a gem of a business. Or he said, you can go to the VC and blow it out, and it would be an okay business, and you would lose, I mean, losing control isn't the big deal here, but it would just be a different business. And that's the other thing I'm aware of now. As I go into this thing in Cincinnati, I think, well, what do I really want for a business? Do I want a gem of a business that has a huge return for my angel investors and my employees, or do I want to, you know, make these do I want to do a media deal, which I could do, because after all, Dollar Diva, the animated series, I mean, that's cool. I can do that. I'm not sure I want to any longer if they won't do a deal that works for me. But I think the difference today is you have slightly more leverage to actually, that's my Palm Pilot telling me I'm supposed to be here. I'm so wired, I cannot tell you. But I think that today you have to do more due diligence on your venture capitalists. They do due diligence on you. And generally we forget, as the person being invested in, that our job is to do due diligence on them as well and really know when to walk away from the table. I mean, you've got to be willing to say, you know what, your money's too expensive, and live with the consequences of that. That will pay off for you.
Do you think it's really that important for your business to be on the internet? Because recently I heard a spokesperson from Microsoft said that coming up in the future, in the next couple of years, there'll be like two types of businesses. Businesses that are on the internet and businesses that are out of business. Do you believe in that?
That's a great soundbite. I certainly think that, certainly for my business, to have an element online is one way to leverage my information. In my business plan, we don't show making any money from the internet. We do show it as a marketing tool. So in that way, I would say, if you don't have it in your marketing plan somewhere, you're probably losing some opportunities, but I don't agree that this is the way we're all going to make money in the future. In the end, you've got to have something people want to buy. It's a great idea.
Two questions. One is, you said you were having a lot of fears when you were starting a company, and I'm curious what specifically those fears were. And the other question is, why you decided to drive down here today?
An excellent question.
Give me an ulcer.
He called me twice on the road.
I get this phone call that says, hey, she just left San Francisco. She might be a little late. It's cutting it tight. So I called her up and I said, if you don't get here on time, I'm going to put on a tutu and I'm going to dance for the audience and tell them I'm you. She got here.
The fears. Remember, I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur, and all I knew then was what I didn't know. And it was like leaping into the void. Now, what I've come to understand that there's nothing less secure in life than a job in corporate America. And in the end, for me, I am so much more secure, sort of taking charge of my own destiny. But it took me a while to get there, and I was just amazed at my level of ignorance when I started. I don't have an MBA. The smartest thing I did was find a partner. It was a woman with a degree from the Yale School of Management, and we were just a killer partnership. The second answer to your question is that April is the month from hell. I am actually in my office 5 days this month, and on Sunday I kind of looked at everything over and thought, I can't get my car and the plane and my body all in the same place at any one place if I fly to San Francisco, because I had a bunch of other things to do, and I live in Santa Barbara. So I finally decided, screw it, I'm just driving everywhere. It was a simple logistics solution. It was nothing more than that. If I had my own chauffeur and my own plane, you know, I would have worked it out, and I will someday, but I'm not there yet.
Being a young woman who wants to enter corporate America or start my own business, and maybe create a new corporate America,
Yes.
there's a perception in some generations that if you are at the top and a woman, you are hard, you are a Rambo, and you are basically not a very nice person, and you know you have to be rough and tough. Do you see this, you know, continuing? And have you experienced that with other women, or were you at all that at one point in your life?
I was never that, I can tell you. And I think that, yeah, there are women like that, but there's also Donna Dubinsky of Palm Pilot fame, Meg Whitman of eBay, Carly Fioroni of Hewlett Packard. None of those women do we think of as tough and hard. Then on the other hand, there's Nancy Evans of iVillage in fame, but that's true for men. What happens is, of course, if you're tough, you're not just tough, you're a bitch. And I think that, you know, there it is. And I think what is glorious really about corporate America and running your own business these days, that the fact is there are really dreadful men and there are really dreadful women, and there are really cool women and really cool men. And they come in all sizes, colors, and shapes. And independent means we have a policy of huge diversity. I mean, truly, you walk in and we would never say this in our literature or anything we say to parents, but the truth is the hardest part of our camp is not the business learning. It is dealing with so many different people at one time. But we've really said, look, if you can't deal with difference, you can't do business in this world. It is a global economy. So yeah, I think you're going to get that label every now and then, but you know, screw them if they can't take a joke. You just have to be who you are and use your voice and stick to your vision and not worry about what other people have to say about you.
Two questions. One, what are your thoughts on turning a hobby into a business? And then the second question is, how much time do you think it takes out of a person's life or day to start this business? What should you expect in going into business? Is it giving up everything for this business, or what are your thoughts?
Let me take that question first, because I think that applies to everybody, really. I actually do believe you cannot do it all. I don't believe men can do it all, and I don't believe women can do it all. I don't think that you can truly, or let's put it this way, I can't do it all. I need focus. I'm not married, I don't have children. Do I think everybody has to give that up? No. But I can tell you it works for me to be really focused. And it's taken me, you know, I started this in 1992. I'm still at it. I hike, I have a very cool life, I do the most extraordinary, wonderful things you can imagine. But Kathleen Brown says it really well. What she says is, yeah, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And I think she's really captured something. So when you think about, well, what can I do? The question is, what are you willing to focus on really? And what are the consequences of that for you? And I think that's true for men and women. You know, we're talking a lot about work-family balance. And God knows I talk about that, and I try to incorporate a lot of flexibility into the culture of my company so that we can have lives. But you know, men had something smart going on for them back in the 50s and 60s when they worked and the women stayed at home. It's like, we had a household assistant at home running things and somebody bringing in money. That was an efficient breaking up of labor. Do I think we can do that anymore? No. 90% of all women have to take care of themselves economically at some point in their lives. That is not an option. But I just spent the night I had breakfast in San Francisco with 2 friends who in fact try to do it all, and they are driving themselves crazy. So whether you are a man or a woman, please just make some choices and cut some things out and say no a lot. You know, just say no, really. And I'm not talking just about drugs. I'm talking about, do you want to be on this advisory board? No. Do you want to volunteer for that committee? No. You know, those are all really good things to do, but if you're trying to start a business, you've only got so many hours in the day. You know, you need to sleep. You need to sleep 8 hours a night. Trust me on this. Turning your hobby into a business. The answer is it's a very cool thing to do if it has scale. If it's just going to give you a subsistence, marginal existence, and you need more for your family, your life, and your retirement, then don't do it. I mean, for me, that's the only reason not to do it. If you can only do it as a subsistence business, and it's not going to help you take care of yourself when you're old, then it's not a good option. Unless you do it for a little period of time, and it is your learning mechanism. You know, nothing like a good screw-up to learn from. Seriously, if you haven't failed at something phenomenally, then you just haven't given yourself opportunities to learn enough, and this year you should set yourself a goal of failing at something really dramatically so you can take something cool from it. I believe that with my whole heart, having screwed up a lot. Yes?
You mentioned, this is truly a global economy, and I'm wondering, do you plan on spreading into other countries?
We have. Already. We're in Australia, and I'm going off to Australia again in May, because the company I've been partnering with there came back and said, you know, we think we'd like to grow worldwide with you. So yes. And the truth is that wasn't in my business plan, and I'm going into it kicking and screaming because I got enough right here in the US. But it's very clear to me if I don't find some way to respond, somebody else is going to fill that need.
One of the things that I get from you is that being an entrepreneur, you have to be very confident in not only your vision, but more importantly, who you are. And is that something that you found evolved over time?
Oh, yeah. You know, when I said to you that you live in a steady state of terror, that really is a way of saying, listen, I can pull this off and sort of chat with you as though I own the world. But I have wonderful advisors. There are very few big decisions I make when I haven't talked with a lot of different people and get lots of different points of view, because I don't trust that I'm so omnipotent that I have all the answers. And I think, yeah, over time your voice comes, your sense of who you are comes. I've made enough mistakes now and survived them that I have more confidence than I did, 10, 15 years ago.
You said at one point that you didn't enjoy the nonprofit.
Yes.
Was wondering why.
I think, well, there were a couple of reasons. One was that it was an issue of scale. There is something about the financial systems of nonprofits that funders with the very different, I have to say, in our presence tonight is a representative of the LA Women's Foundation who, hello Rhonda, I think it's Rhonda Scott up there and back. Generally foundations fund things for 2 to 3 years and then stop funding them because, you should solve the problem in 2 or 3 years. I've been at this since 1992. I haven't even begun. So there's something about the sort of expectation for length of time it takes to get something done and investment. Foundations don't understand you need to invest significant amounts of money to make a serious difference. And I think coming out of the private sector and really seeing what scale and critical mass can do, I just was too impatient.
I was just wondering how you share your ideas. It seems like you go and you negotiate and you make deals on your own. What happens if, how do you pass this on to people that work with you, or what happens if, to the company, when it's all with you? I mean,
Actually, it isn't anymore, happily. And in fact, I've just hired somebody who I expect will take over my job in the next year. We've got a really interesting team of people. Communication has been a real challenge because when I started, I didn't really mean this to be a business, you know. And we have 10 people on the payroll who are literally all over the country. New York, Massachusetts, Michigan, North Carolina. So you can imagine the communication. But I'm a great believer in experiential learning. And so when I do meetings, people come with me. We meet as a group, I don't know, once a quarter if we can afford it. Sometimes not quite that often. But I would say that I'm not a lone ranger by a long shot, nor do I have any interest in being. And I have some of the coolest, smartest people in the country working on my team. And I do think that matters. If you can't tolerate smart people being around you, then give it up. You're going to have.
You said you can't do everything by yourself, but what methods you use to recruit people?
Oh, great question. I seduce. That is it. If people don't think what you're doing is more fun than anything else they could possibly do, they're not going to come play with you. That's one thing. The other thing is you need to feed them. And I'm truly not joking about that. My first company in Polaroid, I had no money to feed anybody, and I was trying to get this group of corporate wonks to do things with me, and they were all terrified. And so what I did was promise them a great meal once a week. And so once a week, I would cater in food from some cool ethnic restaurant in Cambridge. And they became devoted to me. And really, I think you have to stoop to that. It helps. Somebody else?
Midori over.
Oh.
Did you learn any either financial or legal surprises on your journey? And do you have any recommendations to resources, books, that would help people who are just starting to not have to run into some of those?
What was the first part of your question again?
Have you ran into any financial or legal surprises?
Oh, well, daily. Well,
In your business plan.
the first one, of course, if you don't get your venture funding or your angel funding out the door, is that cash flow will indeed make you totally crazy. And people say to you, it's very trite, you need twice as much. No, you need 3 times as much money and 6 times as much time. Those probably aren't surprises, but I do think if you don't know what you don't know, you'll forge ahead, and so you sort of keep going anyway. We have used angel investors and sales to help smooth out our early days, and I have to say that has proved really useful for us. I am the queen of bootstrapping, and it was amazing. I had dinner last night with a woman up in San Francisco who got $89 million in 1999, blew through it, and her company was purchased at fire sale a few months ago. And, we had a great conversation, but the entire time, all I wanted to say was, how did you blow through $89 million? I didn't. I'm too well-bred to ask that sort of question. So I think one of the things you will learn from whether it's books or other entrepreneurs is you really just eke out a living and really make sure sales are driving you in the early days if you can. And if you are doing a business or a product or a technology that requires a substantial capital investment, you really get your ducks in order to get your money in first. Legal surprises, not so much for me. We have a lot of intellectual property. What I have always done is gone to the very top lawyers in the field. It doesn't matter where I'm starting. I may have no money, but the things I care about are legal services and design. So I don't fool around. If you are not world class, then I'm not playing with you because I'm going world class. And therefore, I need to start with people who really know what they're doing. I will tell you, Pentagram Design, for example, which is in fact one of the top 5 design firms in the world, owns as big a chunk of my company as I do at this point. It is cheap at half the price. And my legal firm is a hatshot firm in Boston. So I don't get surprised because I really use smart people.
I'm going to have to cut cut you off because a lot of kids have to go to class.
It's been a pleasure.
Before we give her a hand, I want to make an announcement I'm very proud of. This young lady sitting over here, Nicole, is a graduate of LMU from, 50, 60 years ago, something like that. 1995, was it?
Yes.
She's now with the Girl Scouts. This summer, I'm happy to say, we are co-sponsoring with Joline and with the Girl Scouts a program here at LMU to train young women on entrepreneurship. The camp startup here, which we bring the women in here, and it's not a camp in your normal terms. This isn't camping out, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm really proud that we're able to do that with her and with the Girl Scouts, so it's going to be kind of neat. So let me say, huh?
Actually, and you should know, it looks like one of our field trips is going to be off to Dodger Stadium because there's a cool woman who really wants to entertain and host the girls. So it's going to be a great camp.
Give Joline a hand and watch the news and the papers in the future, because somebody asked the question about nonprofit and profit. Whitey did. The real coming thing in the future of society is what we call social entrepreneurs. People who do good for society in an entrepreneurial way, and there's no shame in making some money doing that. It's a beautiful thing to earn some money in your pocket and be able to die at the end and say, I did something good for society. The world's better for me being here. That's what it's all about. So give this lady a hand. You're going to have a lot. Based on what I've heard here tonight, I think she owes me 6 Palm Pilots and 4 phones. Okay.